Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on our live stream event tonight, 3D Portraiture and Evening with Ian Spriggs. My name is Adam Hartel, and I'm a recruiter here at Gnomon, and it's with great honor that I'll be introducing our guest tonight. But before I introduce him, I'd like to thank Lenovo for sponsoring this event. Lenovo helps us to continue to bring free educational events like this to you. And so with that said, I'd like to now introduce our guest, Ian Spriggs. Questioning the notion of portraiture and our understanding of the uncanny valley, Ian Spriggs is a digital portrait artist specializing in the creation of believable digital humans. His work focuses on the connection we have to digital humans by exploring what makes us human and how we define identity. As a forerunner in the creation of digital humans, his hyper-realistic works have been recognized globally. Ian is currently working as the character lead at Unity Lab in Vancouver. And with that, I would like to welcome you, Ian, to the stream. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you for the talk.
Yeah, and we actually just recently had an exhibit of your work in the Gnomon Gallery, I think just a few months back.
Yeah, really exciting.
That was spectacular. I think, why don't we kick it off with, I'd love to hear, and I think all the people tuning in, can you share with us just a little bit about your journey, kind of how you got to be doing the things that you're doing and the influences you had along the way?
Yeah, sure. That's a big question.
Well, you can narrow it down.
Yeah, well, I've always been an artist to some regards, like always drawing and doing paintings and stuff like this. So long story short, I went to art school. I went to art school for 5 years. They kind of pushed me more into doing the abstracts, and I didn't really get along with the teachers too well. They kind of like always was pushing me to do something I didn't want to do, so I was always fighting to do like realism, doing more photorealistic styles and like seeing how I can express people. And then after art school, I kind of moved to Montreal and I started drawing again and drawing faces, and I really found my passion for like doing the artwork and realizing that people are what my interest is. And then at that point, I went to Seneca in Toronto, and that really kind of defined what my tools are, defined where I want my artwork to go. So Seneca kind of helped give me the tools I needed to allow my career to progress to what it is today. Mm-hmm. So basically, after school, I started a company, Stars Animation, did some cartoony stuff for a couple of years. Went to a company, Mr. X. They basically taught me how to model digital humans. Like, and they really, it was like, they put me as a character lead pretty quick, and I was just learning how to do that stuff. Yeah, and then a couple of companies like Oats. I worked at Oats Studio. That was with Neil Blomkamp. That was a good one. That was a good experience. And then recently, I've just joined Unity as one of the character leads at the Unity Labs in Vancouver. So we've got some pretty exciting stuff coming out soon. And then that's it. Here I am.
All right. Well, what got you? I mean, obviously, you mentioned at the beginning you were doing portraiture and you enjoyed drawing people, drawing portraits. What specifically kind of steered you towards or inspired you to do, the 3D portraiture that you're doing today?
I think it was just like the tools of like 3D. It just like allowed me to, it opened up a door which I never really discovered before. Something that's like never really been done. So it's like, I love like the masters of like history, like the Rembrandts and stuff like this, but it's like they've already mastered it. They've already done the best you can possibly do with it. But with digital, it's like digital's never been done. So we can kind of like learn from what they've done and then kind of like discover new ways of doing stuff and new ways of discovering like what makes us human and showcasing different types of personalities and emotions and stuff like that. And I think the tool itself actually intrigued me enough that I wanted to learn more about it.
And so for you, what does a portrait mean to you in terms of, there's lots of different ways people go about making portraits. For some, it's just making an exact facsimile of what you're seeing. But kind of, if you could break down for us kind of what goes into your thought process when you're approaching a portrait.
So a lot of people think a portrait is a representation of a face, which I don't think it is at all. Even though I focus on representations of faces, I don't think a portrait is a representation of a face at all. Like for example, like if you started to change like the color of your hair or something like that. People think like they're like a deep individual. But if you start changing the color of your hair, people will treat you differently. So it's kind of like the external self is going to start changing the inner self, and then all of a sudden it's like the external self is the driving force. So it's like, well, maybe it's like your body is who you are, but then it's like you've got your internal self, which is also who you are as well, and then you've got your clothes, which define like your personalities. There's so many aspects of what a portrait is. It's supposed to show every possible personality trait, emotion. It's anything which shows somebody who that person is in any way. It could be. Do you mind if I can share you some images and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll explain this a little bit better. I'm going to actually share something which my brother did, my older brother did, Spriggs. So he did. Oh, hold on a second. Let me just find it. He did a piece called Transparency Report. So basically, these are our portraits. So even though they're not a representation of a face, there are actually indeed a portrait. He basically made items of a bag, like going through the airports, like you put your bag in the airport, they have an x-ray of it. But he's saying that what defines people are the items they own. So it's like in this bag, you can see like there's some chewing gum, a hair comb. You can tell this is a lady, probably a businesswoman of some sort. Same one. This is like a camera bag. Maybe it's like a National Geographic photographer traveling the world. But it's kind of like these items that kind of define the people's jobs and the love of life and like the passions and desires and what they want to do. And like that, to me, is just as much of a portrait as than a representation of a faces. So yeah, I think a portrait is basically just anything which represents like our uniqueness, or what makes us different from each other.
Well, that's really interesting, I think, because I think often the assumption with working digitally, and especially digital 3D, we can do so much. So do you find that you need to limit yourself to a certain degree, or how do you choose what you're going to do when you can almost do everything today?
So basically, doing representations of my family, like people who are close to me, those are like my things I try to focus on. It's like Rembrandt. He does a lot of paintings where his paintings were about like an autobiography of his life. He did so many different portraits of who like people he met, people he like did commissions for, a lot of self portraits, and that basically showed his life. So when I decided what my art is going to be about, I try and do the same as what he did: is make it personal, make it something which I care about, and which is the people who are around me. So it's my friends, my family, and I'm trying to share who they are. And by sharing who they are, it kind of also shares my story. It shows as a collection of my work. You can see it's almost like an autobiography of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think focusing on something which is personal, it really gives you more passion and drive to want to do it, rather than constantly being like if you go to work and you've got to constantly be paid to do somebody else's dream, you might start like lacking a little bit of drive to do that. But if you're constantly focusing on what you love, I think you'll have the drive and you want to continue doing the artwork.
I've had the fortune of hearing you give other talks, and I've seen some of your stuff online as well. And you've got some really interesting things to say about how art history and art theory has sort of influenced your approach with your 3D work. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let me share some more slides with you. So yeah, a lot of art history has really inspired me to do my work, because it's like they've kind of basically, I was saying before, it's like the masters have basically figured it out exactly how to convey emotion. They've done exactly what I wanted to do, but I'm just using a different medium. So a lot of my work is actually kind of very heavily based on the masters. So I'll take inspirations from what they've already done and see how I can incorporate into the people I know. This is my brother Richard. So I'm just going to see how I can take what that technique is and put it to my work. And so you can see a lot of my work is inspired by these masters.
Well, and when you look at some of the old masters' work, obviously they don't have the possibility for fidelity that we do today. So I think one of the criticisms, at least that I've heard in kind of the evolution of working in 3D, working with digital, is that fight against keeping it from feeling sterile, like breathing life into it, as it were. And having seen your work, I mean, obviously there is an emotional impact. You feel the presence of the person, even if you don't know them, when you're looking at that. How do you achieve that, working with digital 3D and topology and those kinds of things?
It's tricky because with 3D, it's like the tricky part is to making it actually feel natural. And what is natural is a lot of imperfection and flaws. So in painting and drawing, you can kind of naturally get that with your the brush stroke. There can be imperfections in it, but digital, everything is so precise that sometimes things look fake because they're so nice and clean. So I think really focusing on making things not straight edges and nothing's perfectly symmetrical. Just doing a lot of times I take photo shoots of my subjects and they say, oh, please don't include this part because I got a little scratch in myself here. That's it's not, I don't find it attractive. But I'm like, no, that's the goal. That's what's going to make people connect to you and feel the humanness of you, because people aren't perfect. So I think really focusing on that aspect of things is really helps you believe these are believable people, just like the paintings are, the masters.
That's really interesting, because I do think that if it were me, yeah, I would think, hey, you can create, you're designing reality, you're working in 3D, so you can make me look better. You can make reality better in what you're doing. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that, about the importance of flaws and this more subtle nuances of what goes into a portrait?
Yeah, well, actually, so you actually brought up a good points, which I wouldn't mind addressing. So a lot of times people, they want a portrait to represent a flattery. So it's are you supposed to do a portrait that represents a flattery, or is it supposed to be accurate representation? So a lot of paintings in the past actually have been rejected by the clients because they've not been flattered enough by them. So it's well, that's not a true essence of who that person is. So I think there's a fine balance where you got to make something beautiful, but also absolutely represent who they are exactly. And sometimes it's you might not get somebody who's the most attractive person, but then they're going to want to have that beauty in it. I worked at a company a while ago, at Mr. X, where I was modeling a guy, and he kept on getting rejected. They kept on saying, no, we don't like him like this. The model's not right. The model's not right. Keep on working on it. And then after 3 weeks of working on this one model, I realized they're not rejecting the model. They're rejecting it because they don't think the guy is good looking. So I basically made him symmetrical, cleaned him up a little bit, got rid of those imperfections. Right away, they were approved, we like it. And I was it's not the guy. You've changed him to be something he's not. So yeah. I think that's going to be interesting.
Well, if memory serves, in some art's history, I mean, this is the exact same kind of quandary that some of the old masters ran into as well, right? Some lord wants a portrait, and they're kind of over art directing what they should look like, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I actually had a perfect example. I'm not sure where it is, but I had a perfect example of a painting which was completely rejected. It's a beautiful painting. It was completely rejected by the sitter. I'm not sure exactly where it is. But yeah, it was completely rejected by the sitter, which was kind of funny. When my sister-in-law saw her portrait for the first time, let me bring this one up. So this is Heather, that's my sister-in-law. She loves the piece now, but when she first saw it, she was just kind of stared at it, and it was a little bit wasn't sure what to say about it, because I wasn't sure if she thought it looked like her or if it didn't look like her. She was kind of quiet about it. But I think it's she wanted to be more flattered or more, I don't know what it was. I think she wanted a little bit more from it. But I think it ended up being on the cover of some magazine. When she saw it on the cover of the magazine, she absolutely loved it. She's like, this is fantastic.
Okay. I've heard this phrase used before by you, and in relation to some other talks you've given. This idea of the uncanny valley. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that means?
So yeah, the uncanny valley is basically something which is almost human, which it should be human, but you can't quite put your finger on it, but it's not. But your brain is trying to say no, it's human. Like it falls into the uncanny valley. It's like cartoons and comic books and all that stuff. That is not uncanny valley because it's your brain doesn't accept it to be real. Your brain is always like, yeah, it's not real, so it doesn't have to be real. As soon as you get closer
Mm.
to the photorealistic aspect of things, if something's just slightly off, your brain's going to reject it, and it's almost like a biologically revulsed, like it's like ingrained in us because since we were born, we've been wired to understand what the face is, what a human is, and the minute expressions and the subtleties of facial movements, the body language, and we are so well trained in it. If something's a little bit off, it's not right, and maybe it's like we're just completely repulsed by it, and we don't want any part of it. And so I think we can just pick up so quickly because of everybody's got such good training. Like your grandma, like anybody's grandmother who's never seen 3D can look at my portraits and say if it's real or not, basically.
Mm. So I think one of the things that some of the folks tuning in are really interested in is if you could walk us through a bit of the process that you go through when you're creating a digital portrait.
Sure.
It can be more general, it doesn't have to be a one-to-one breakdown, but I think we're all very curious to see, kind of how you go about this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we can talk for a bit. I got a couple of videos set up. This is a portrait of Scott Eaton that I did a little while ago. Scott Eaton's one of like the anatomy masters. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening and probably already know this. I met him at THU. So as soon as I met him, we became friends, and then I immediately was like, Scott, you have to let me do your portraits. So he was like, for sure. He felt honored. So this is his portrait. So basically, here we go. So basically, I just start off in Maya. Usually I have a basic generic men, which I use for almost all my portraits. So they're always from the same base mesh. It's usually pretty clean topology. Try to get the edge loops going over the eyes and the mouth and stuff. I've updated it a little bit since this one, but this is for most of my portraits, this is the mesh I used. It's rigged, so I can pose it, move it around as much as I want. So basically, pose this character into the mesh I want, like my final subject to be in. So before this point, I've actually taken a photo shoot of my subjects too. So I'll take about, I don't know, 500 photos of the subject. So different angles, just like it's almost like a scan. Like I'm doing a manual scan of somebody to do a 360 of them. Get the light stick, do different lightings and stuff. And then from those photos, I'll have a good idea of what I want my portrait to be. It's not a direct one-to-one copy of a photograph. Sometimes it's just like I'll take a head of one, the arm of another, this type of lighting from another. And it's like a collage of 4 or 5 different photos. But I have a very good idea of where I want my portrait to go before I start. So basically, I'm posing him in the pose I wanted Scott to be in. And then basically from this point, I'll take it to a Mudbox. And then just start using my knowledge of anatomy just to clean it up. So one question that people always ask me is, why do I use Mudbox over ZBrush? ZBrush has got some amazing tools and stuff like that. Probably a lot better than Mudbox. But what I like about Mudbox is this camera angle is the exact same as this camera angle. So once I start rendering, and I say, okay, I'm trying to fix something on the eye over here, I can go back to Mudbox and I know exactly where in Mudbox that like the part of the model which needs fixing. So because you can sync cameras between the two, I find that one of the most powerful reasons I like using Mudbox. Mudbox is also pretty good with having layers too. It's good for if you ever creating blend shapes. Like for you've got 100 blend shapes, you got a model, they're all pretty organized. So yeah, and then continue just sculpting. I usually work from large silhouettes to smaller. Like detail is the least important part of the portrait, I find, even though that's the stuff people seem to look at the most. I find silhouettes and like the overall shape and form is the most important. So I'll always look at how the silhouettes and what type of like arm direction people are doing, how the head is moved, like the pose of it. And then I start working from like large details to smaller, smaller, smaller. And like obviously like doing pores and small wrinkles, that's kind of like comes last. Scott Eaton's veins are actually that big as well. There's a little arguments online where people are saying they're not that big. And then Scott Eaton was like, no, those are my veins. But yeah, most of the time I don't use Marvelous Designer either. I usually just sculpt all the clothes by hand. It's a better way. I like to have the control. Marvelous Designer is pretty cool with getting natural results, but sometimes I just want things to be like a certain way, like the exact way I'm envisioning it. And sometimes I'll have like certain lines, like the line on his t-shirt coming on. I want that to be exactly across his chest because I'm trying to create a diagonal line for the composition. So I can make choices like that with Marvelous Design. I don't feel like I can make those choices. And obviously I keep everything on separate layers for all the details. So I just kind of delete things if I don't like them and always turn them on and off. Texturing is pretty straightforward. I texture in Mudbox too. And in Photoshop, make like tileable textures in Photoshop of clothes. And then you can just kind of import it into Mudbox. Mudbox has got some pretty good tools here to help paint. You use them with stencils and stuff. I'll say this is actually, the diffuse maps are perhaps the most important part of doing a portrait. I'll spend, I don't know, like 70% of my time just focusing on the diffuse maps of the face. I think everything else, like sculpting, doesn't take me long. The head takes a bit of time. Look dev is not too bad, but it's the diffuse map is where I'm trying to really create the likeness. I think that's what is the key to making realistic portraits. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I use XYZ maps. I'm slowly going away from them because I find they don't match the pose of my subjects. And since I'm getting a little bit more realistic, I'm trying to match the pose of my subjects a little bit more. So I'm kind of basically doing what they do, but I'm just kind of creating it myself. So from the photos I take, I'll create my own pore maps and like my own like micro and tertiary maps and stuff like that.
And while we're in the middle of it, I think there's a couple of related questions that have already come in from the chat.
Sure.
The first is from Enyo244, and it looks like they're curious to know, what kind of camera you're using when you're kind of getting your reference shots.
I got a Canon camera. I think it's a Canon 5D. So it's not too bad. It's like I think you can get them for like 1,500 or something like that. So basically, this is basically taking all the photos I have. So I take about 400 or 500 with this camera. I also have. Hold on, I gotta show you this. This is pretty cool. I also have like a little light stick, which I can help make a glow. It's like a lightsaber, basically, which you can put on someone and kind of like you can get a really good like Rembrandt glow. Mm-hmm. I think the battery is dead, but yeah. But yeah, it's really good to get nice soft lighting I think my next purchase is going to be buying some soft boxes to see how that will look.
And we've got another question that's come in from Facebook. Let's see. Ahmed G. Kopt is asking, what focal length do you typically use for sculpting?
That's a good question. Oh, I can hear myself speaking. Sorry, I can hear.
Are you getting that audio
Yeah,
feedback loop on your end too, Ian?
yeah.
Oh, okay. The audio issue should be fixed now, Ian. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
no problem. So, okay, the focus length. Yeah, that's a really good question. So for modeling, I find a higher focus length actually works a lot better because it makes the face flat. It's more orthographic. Where you're getting like if it's a lower focus length, you get more perspective. Actually, do you know what? Let's just talk about that for a second. I got some slides, I think. Hold on a second. Sorry, I've got actually, there we go. There we go, here we go, perfect. So if you have a super high focus length, it basically makes the subject look a little bit like this, like he's in a fishbowl, which is probably not too good to model with. But it's like the higher focus length you get, it makes it a little bit flatter. So you can actually get a sense of what the silhouette's going to be if you change the cameras in Maya and Mudbox. So usually I like to model from this one. But you've got to also realize that the focus length, just because you might model in a higher focus length, it doesn't mean that your final portrait, the focus length should be the same. Because they basically convey different emotions, basically. And like, this is a portrait of Andre, where with a higher focus length, he seems a little bit more like, he's got more authority. He seems a little bit more like stern. Whereas if he looks a little bit more like this, he looks a little bit weaker, but you feel like you're closer to him. It's a little bit more intimate. So it's like, depending on what your mood you want to go for, you can get the focus length to help create that story as well.
And then CJ Berry is asking, what are the three main tools that you use in ZBrush for your models? And apparently you're using Mudbox rather than ZBrush at this point. But I think they're curious about, what kind of tools you're using when you're going about your sculptures.
Like the tools down here, basically, I just use the sculpt tool, the wax tool, move tool. That's basically it. Actually, you know what? That's actually, hold on a second. I'll open my mud box. I got a secret brush. So basically, I've got this stencil. I'm not sure if you can see it. It looks like a little peak. So I got my sculpt, my wax, and my grab. Those are my three main tools. And then I usually put this one on my sculpt. And what it does is it's absolutely perfect for creating creating wrinkles. So basically, I'll do all my wrinkles with just this little magic brush. And basically, you can kind of like do everything with it. I do wrinkles and clothes with it, like all the fine details on the lips with it. It just kind of creates a nice natural feel. Yeah, then you can even like make the clothes like tie the folds in his clothes if you wanted to. So that's basically one of the tools I like. So these three are my main tools, and once in a while I'll add this little stencil to help with like this. hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you see, I find exactly the same thing with Photoshop artists or people working on digital platforms. Is often you see this high quality work and people are assuming that you've got so many tricks in your bag, but more often than not, just a few simple tools, and it's about how you use them, as opposed to the magic brush.
And it's true. I like simplicity. Everything I do is about being simple. Like my look dev stuff. People are always like, "What's your shader? Well, how are you doing all this stuff?" My latest portrait of my mom. Like, I'll show you the shader network for this one. Everyone's going to be printing screen in a second. So basically, that's it. I got my normal map, diffuse map, spec map. Is there also a shader? And that's basically how I did my mom's portrait. But
Yeah.
what I did is I really focused on getting those maps like absolutely perfect, like no mistakes. I'm not trying to fix it with other maps. I'm just getting those three maps to be the best I can. I render the high res geometry sometimes, so it's like you can tell I just export the high res straight from Mudbox. Takes a little time to export it, but it saves from having to create displacement maps. I mean, obviously for production, I would never do this, but that is for home, so I don't really mind doing it too much.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't affect render time either. V-Ray can render like millions of polygons about the same time as a couple polygons.
Now we've got plenty more questions coming in, but I also don't want to rabbit trail too far from you were in the midst of kind of showing us your process. I want to give you the chance to sort of finish that thought before we move forward.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, let's go back. So we finished texturing him. So I work with XGen. XGen's has been pretty handy. I find there's no easy way to do XGen. It just takes time and patience. You just gotta make sure each guide is working, and yeah, you just gotta take your time with it. Try and keep things simple as you can. Like I try not to have too many like clumps and cuts and noises and stuff like that. Just try and keep everything as simple, because once you start getting too complicated, it'll be a lot harder to fix things. So like the more guides you have, it's going to be a lot harder to start changing things later if you don't like the final result. Lighting, I try and keep everything pretty straightforward. So in Scott's portrait, there's only like a key light, a secondary light. There's a little fill light here for the bottom of his chin, and then basically just a dome light. And that's basically it. There's nothing too fancy about it. Some portraits I just do one light. I don't find there's too much more than what you need. I think my mom's portrait was a little bit more complicated for the lighting aspect of things. So basically, I had to recreate. So when I took the photo shoot of her, I had to recreate the room. So I had to get all the measurements of what the room was, get the size of the windows, recreate the size of the windows, which are these three things. And then as I was taking a photo shoot of her, I actually had like a whiteboard for a bounce light to help reflect some of the light, because under her chin it was a bit too dark. So this light is just a little bit of light reflecting up here. And then this was just the reflection in the eye. So that's probably like one of the more complicated setups. Oh, and I had a little dome light, I believe. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. So that's better. But yeah, this is one of the more complicated light setups I've got. Most of them I try and go as simple as possible.
As long as we're kind of in that realm of your process, can you talk to us a little bit about, I mean, obviously there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into the sculpting, but so much of what you're talking about also has to do with the way that they're posed, and the way that you then express the sculpting that you've done. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for the posing for sure. I got a little. Hold on a second. I got a little part in my speech back in the day when I was talking about posing. Oh, where is it? So yeah, like for posing, there's a whole bunch of art history. Like, I'll quickly share some of this stuff with you. So like back in the day, it's like most things were posed from the sides, one eye type of thing. It kind of went to more into this style, whereas you got 1 foot forward. Then you got this pose where it's like it was 1 foot forward plus the arm raising. The arm raising was kind of like to say, hey, like it's not like look over there, but it's like look towards greatness type of thing. So like the poses really started. The poses were creating the story, basically. And like even like with one hand up, it's almost like pointing to God. Whereas the Adam and Eve is like he's pointing to God, saying like, no, don't eat the apple. It's just like the pose itself is basically explaining what the story is. This painting is a pretty famous one. It's like the one hand is one hand almost to God, but the fact that his left hand is holding her right hand, this is actually, you're not supposed to do this in marriage back in the day. Means it's not a typical marriage. So basically, she won't inherit any of his wealth. So basically, this is not a real wedding. So
Wow.
some people are like, oh, just from a pose, you start learning a lot of stories behind a lot of things like this. So the males had a pose, so they had a pretty cool one, and then all of a sudden women had to have a pose. So they didn't get the greatest pose because theirs was more about sexuality and having to defend themselves from the guys. So it's not a very, I don't know. There's almost like a sexual thing all the time where it's like they got to hide themselves a little bit. But then what happened was they kind of took that and they claimed it for themselves, and all of a sudden there's so much confidence behind it. And then this pose, especially by Monet, this pose was basically, it's like now the woman's looking at you in her, like looking directly at you. So what was a pose which wasn't like a powerful pose for women, all of a sudden the women took that pose. The woman is looking at you in the eye, and now they kind of own it, basically. Now that it's like making you feel a little bit vulnerable, that they're looking at you and you're just like, why are you looking at them type of thing. So it's just like the pose alone is basically creates the story for this. Then you got the Serpentine Pose, which is everything's a little twisting. But basically, yeah, like the twisting pose, it makes it like dynamic. And it's like if you want to show a battle or a war scene, it's just like you can't get any more dynamic than every single pose in here is being twisted and distorted. It almost creates so much drama and chaos. So that's just from the pose alone. So from little things, some of the things I was kind of focusing on in some of my portraits were seeing how like two characters being in one scene can play off of each other. Like Amanda's very rigid, Graham is very relaxed, everything's in a curved shape. He's more like the serpentine curves, and she's very rigid. But it's like goes on the personalities as well. Like she was a little bit more like stern and he's more relaxed. It's just to see, but they don't feel separated. They feel like they're together because they are in a relationship. But it's like the yin and yang type of feeling I was going for. Even this one was, I did this one because I wanted to do like a lack of pose. So back in the day, most portraits were done from like the side, like profile. Like a lot of religious paintings were done on profile, and then they slowly throughout time they started making their way to face the viewer. And this is one of the very first paintings which actually was like directly looking at the viewer. It made the viewer the subject. And that's like, you weren't supposed to do that. That was not what art is about. You're supposed to be the viewer. The painting's the subject. But all of a sudden it's like the roles have been reversed. And so people like got quite upset about that, like how like that's not what's supposed to happen. But this painting by Dürer, he also, on top of that, made himself look like a little bit like Jesus. So all of a sudden now this person who looks like Jesus is looking at me and judging me like that's not supposed to happen. We don't like this. So it's kind of like ill celebrated and hated at the same time. So it's one of the first paintings which actually created such a big conflict like this. So in Jeff's portrait, I kind of wanted to take away the body and just to see if I could create this iconic symbol of somebody with just straight on. It wasn't just about like, hey, look, I did a head, but it's intentionally lack of pose and just seeing how the eyes can make you feel like the pose of the eyes. Because Jeff is like, you can kind of get a sense that he's a strong individual, but his eyes are gentle, so he doesn't feel threatening. He feels like he's welcoming you into his strength in a way. You know what I mean? And that's just by a simple look, which is created by the pose, basically. Neil, his pose is basically, he's got two hens in front. Basically, in art history, if you want to have two hens, you have to be pretty wealthy because it costs money to have hens because they take so long to paint. So Neil, being a top director out there, he had to have like two hens like front and center. So I put his hands in there. So there's the things to show off his status. And then just like, yeah, just hands in general, basically, just the next level of like posing. It's like you can pose the face and the body, but what the hands are doing is basically it basically shows, can express more than the face can sometimes. You can tell more about somebody by what their hands are doing than what their face is doing. The face can lie. The hands are always telling the truth. This picture statue by Bernini. You can feel the sense of despair, like pain the man's going through just by looking at his hands. This artist just took away the guy's face, like his face was not important. He just covered his hands on his face, and that shows like the pain and anger or like the suffering this guy is going through. So like these hands, you get a sense of the human life in them. They're not just like rigid. This is the death of Maret's hands. You can get a sense of this hand is just dead. The person's dead. He's not alive. It's just like there's no life in it. Hand of David, you can feel the strength behind it. You can feel like there's a youthfulness and like he's a very strong individual. The Mona Lisa is very gentle. And like everyone knows this one, it's like this one's basically like the most iconic hand symbol in the world of like God giving Adam like life, basically creating him. It's just like that's just from two hands touching. It's like the power of what hands can do is just unbelievable. So I think when I do my portraits, I always focus on what the hands are doing. Even if they're not front and center, but they're a little bit offside, I always try to make sure what they're doing is important. Like the hand of Graham in the double portrait, his hand was relaxed. Heidi's is a little tense, so you can feel like a little aggression in it. My mom's hands, you can tell they're very gentle, caring hands. My dad's are kind of older, wiser hands, like the workman hands. Andre is a very caring guy. He's kind of like thoughtful. Scott Eaton, you can tell his hands are like he's taking control of, like anatomy was his career. So he's holding his skull. So it's kind of like, but he's kind of got firm grasp of it. So his hands are not loosely holding it, but firmly holding it. And I think that expresses the story even more. And Chris Nichols is a super smart guy. He's worked at V-Ray. He's helped me out a lot. He's been super supportive of my work. He's a very intelligent person. I just wanted to, he does podcasts and he does online interviews a lot. So I wanted to do something which was to show that he's an intellect. Yeah, that's my little speech about poses.
Yeah, and these various poses of your subjects, how much of that is you directing them to display something with their pose, and how much of that is sort of you seeing what they do naturally and trying to capture that?
Okay, so this pose of Tony, I said, Tony, I got this painting I really like, and I would like you to pose like this because I think it'll be fantastic. So I was like, hold your hair, do this. And he was like, the photo shoot did not work at all. It was not a very good photo shoot. But then after a while, like I've taken photos for like half an hour trying to get him to do stuff. He ended up just kind of relaxing. And he just kind of like laid back and just started having a conversation. And then I started getting the best photo shoots of him. And it was when I stopped telling him how to do it, that's when the photo shoots became natural, and that's when it got really good photos. So that's when kind of this kind of pose kind of started to happen.
Yeah. And one of my takeaways immediately from everything you're sharing tonight is um, absolutely the technical execution of being able to sculpt and use the software that you're using, and even how to take a photograph. All that stuff is going into play here. But I'm hearing so many things that are like secondary skills that accumulate to create what you're doing, like photography, lighting, your study of art history. What do you find are, aside from digital sculpture, what are a lot of these sort of other skills or these soft skills that you're drawing from all of your experience to put into these portraits?
That's a good question. Yeah, obviously photography I've started getting into. Uh, just from like realizing like how lighting affects the subjects and what different types of lights they're doing. We can get into that into a little bit if you want. It's a pretty cool topic to talk about. But yeah, I started getting into photography a bit more, which has been super helpful. I found that trying to get better photographs and better lighting scenarios is to start off with. It's a little bit more difficult, but it makes things a lot easier as I'm doing my portraits. Art history is obviously a tool which I've really learned to love. It's just discovering what people have done previously. Like the masses have figured everything out already. So we can just kind of learn from them and kind of stand on the backs of their shoulders and just see what we can come up with ourselves. It's almost like you're standing, or every generation is standing on the back of the previous generation in some regards. I'd like to get more back into drawing a little bit too, just to get more expressive and show more the emotion. Sometimes I find that I get sucked into photorealism a little bit, which is something I don't really want to get into, but that's kind of like, that's how people see my work, is photorealistic, but my work is more based on like hyperrealism, which is derived from photorealism, but it's more focusing on the human emotion and like the human essence of somebody and make them feel believable, not just a photograph. Basically, it's like you can have somebody stood in a T pose, and then like the skin detail is absolutely perfect, but you're not going to feel anything from it. You're going to feel stuff from the lighting, the posing, and different variables like that. Like one of my latest portraits I did of Heidi, I was really just trying to push some boundaries of what I feel comfortable with, just to see what else I can come with and to see how different types of lighting can affect the mood. Like Heidi's a very kind, caring person, but I wanted to put something completely opposite of who she is. And so it's like this conflict of this aggressive, it's far too red, like it's too aggressive, but yet her pose is very gentle and caring, and putting those two together to see how that reacts and see what people think of that. So I want to explore more into stuff like this to see how lighting and stuff like that can affect the portrait.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you're making a brilliant case for something that we were chatting about before the stream, which is sort of this pitfall that a lot of digital artists can fall into, is you just look at people that are doing other digital things, right? So, someone that wants to be an amazing ZBrush sculptor or create the type of portraits you're creating, they're only looking at other people using that software or kind of modern creations. Whereas you're calling back to Rembrandt and to the masters, and you're looking at their work and letting it inform you. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like photorealism is achievable. Like we will get there. Like we might not be there just yet, but I think in a few years, 10 years maybe, photorealism will be achievable by some people. The tools will help us get there somehow. So it's like I'm constantly going to stay on photorealism pathway, I'm going to hit a dead end. And so it's like, if I stay on this path, I'm not going to develop as an artist. I'm not going to discover new techniques. So I'm trying to push my limits and what I'm capable of doing in different directions by doing stuff like the portrait of Heidi with the red. So when we do get to photorealism, I've already got an experience of doing so many different things, I might have discovered a new path which we might not have thought of before.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, I mean, what if I can ask, what are some of the things that you are intuiting? Because I mean, you're definitely uh, blazing a trail, as it were. What are some of the things that you imagine that we might be able to do with what you're doing in terms of what the future might hold?
Oh, like with the digital humans? Yeah, basically, I find digital humans are the future. Basically, like especially with like the coronavirus happening, which is terrible. But it's basically making remote work more of a reality. Like a lot of actors are not going to want to go on sets anymore, so you're going to get the digital just sent over in the file. So you can have like 20 actors all in one scene who could be all over the world, but basically they're all acting in one scene. Basically, or some actors might want to shoot two movies at once, or be a younger person like Arnold Schwarzenegger was in Terminator. Like you
Hmm.
can decide more possibilities of stuff to do once you have an avatar. And then, for example, like this Skype or this chat we're having, just imagine having like VR headsets, and we can like have a digital avatars where we can just interact with each other and walk around each other and stuff like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it has to, if it's going to convey emotion, if it's going to convey presence, it's got to be more, based on what I'm hearing you say, it's got to be more than just a one-to-one facsimile of a person.
Yeah,
It has
exactly.
to have that nuance.
Yeah, I find so like digital doubles for production, they don't need the emotion as much because that's what the actor puts in the emotion. So the actor will do his performance, and that performance goes into the digi double, and then that's what you see. But you can't have just the digi double
Hmm.
without performance. Like so, what we're doing as artists is trying to put our stories into it, our personalities into it to make this feel alive. And it's not just, hey, look at this cool digi double. It looks like a photograph, but you feel nothing.
Yeah. Is it okay if we take some more questions from the chat? We've actually had
Yeah,
quite a few
yeah,
queuing
absolutely.
up as you've been sharing. Let me kind of see where we left off. This is an interesting one because of what you just said, and we've definitely already seen this happen with environments, right? Like with shows like The Mandalorian, we now are
Yeah.
physically filming environments that are actually being created digitally. But they're being physically filmed on screen. So I'm not. Joe Bedwell is asking, what work did you do on The Mandalorian?
Not not much. I just I did some match move models. So I didn't even do it the digi doubles. I did the stuff you don't even see on screen. So I just like we topologized some digi doubles which are used for match moving. So just so they can track cameras.
Got it.
Not very fun.
But
But,
hey, you
yeah,
worked on The Mandalorian though. That's pretty amazing. Um, let's see. Menti MW is asking, have you ever done any other style outside of hyperrealism, and what initially drew you to this style of 3D over all of the others?
I did a lot of political work before.
Hmm.
Uh, Hold on a second. Actually, I have some of my oldest stuff somewhere. Hold on a second. I got my old pictures. Hold on a second. Let me just try and find it. I've got a whole bunch of old work which I could share with you. Yeah, I used to do like a lot of political images. There we go. So this is one I did like of 10 Downing Street. A couple like this is
Hmm.
oh man, when was this? Like 2005 or something? It's like 15 years ago. So this is like 10 Downing Street. There's a British Prime Minister's house. I tried to just do something a little bit like they're losing power type of thing. It's more political than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I did this one. This was, yeah, I think this was 2005 as well, 15 years ago, after the Medusa. But I did a contemporary version of it where basically these people, like the actual painting, I'm just going to bring up the actual painting. You know, it looks like. So I'm not sure if you can see that. That's the original painting.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there's a real story of people like looking like shipwrecks at sea, and they see a boat in the distance, and they're trying to get it to save them. And in the meantime, they're like killing each other and eating each other. Basically, it's pretty horrific. So I was trying to do the same idea, but a contemporary version where they're waving. They're in a plane. So you can see this is a plane, and they're in an airplane wreck, and they're waving to an oil rig for their savior, which is kind of a catch-22 because the oil fueled the plane, which allowed them to go in the air. And so it's like this catch-22. So it's kind of more of a political type of style. So yeah, I did a lot of stuff like this back in the day. I'll show you one more. What is it? So when the financial crisis happened, I also did this one where some guys are beating up a banker. So a lot of people, this is the financial crisis of 2008. So a lot of people are blaming bankers for what happened. So I just did an image of people beating up a banker.
Mm-hmm.
This was ended up being on the cover of Adbusters, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So
while you have this screen up, I've got a quick question about your self-portrait. What was it like for you experiencing that as the creator and the subject?
Oh, for this one?
Yeah, the one in the top middle there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all interesting. I find so. Yeah, you've seen my first self-portrait, right? This is my very first one.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is actually started off my portrait series. This is like basically I use myself as the subject because I knew who I am. I know what I wanted to express. So basically, understanding who somebody is and what it is you have to express about them is one of the challenges. But because I knew myself, I knew what I wanted to express, and I was a subject which was available in the mirror as many times as I want. There's no limitations of how much resources I could get for myself. So I picked myself as the first subject to do. So that's why I did this one. And then from there, I wanted to see my progression after the 5 years of working to see where I'm at now. So I wanted to revisit myself to see where I'm at and just to see how my style's improved and how I've grown both physically and emotionally and talent-wise as well. So I just wanted to see what that looked like.
Well, and if I may say, like this guy looks a lot more seasoned. I get a lot more confidence out of this image in the way that you presented it and the pose and everything.
Yeah, I feel a lot more confident than back in the day because I never did these talks before. I never did it. Talking on podcasts, I just never wanted to do it. Never spoke on stage. I was always like the artist with my headphones on, working away, and I also felt comfortable with it. But now I'm just like kind of getting out there and talking with artists more and just communicating a bit more with people.
Well, and you're definitely, I think, helping people understand the relationship of digital to art. I know there's some folks out there that question, because of digital tools or this or that, it's how can you hold something like that up against a painting or what the old masters did? But to me anyway, you're doing a brilliant job of building that bridge and conveying it as a tool to create art, as opposed to the sort of the all-encompassing thing unto itself. This is really fascinating. We've got another question in from the chat from let's see. I'm trying to get these names right. Forgive me if I do them wrong, guys. Devinge ESR. What is your thought process when modeling? So I guess you can narrow that. That's kind of a broad question, so you can narrow that down however you like. But what is the process that you're going through mentally as you start approaching the modeling specifically?
It's kind of like I've got like the idea of what I want to do, and it's like obviously I'm trying to do something which has never quite been done before. So I'm trying to think of like how to push my limits as much as I possibly can. I don't want to feel comfortable by each portrait I do. I don't want to feel like, yeah, this is good enough. I'm going to do this and release it. My thought process is like, how can I push the limits of this to something which I've never seen before, and just something which other people are going to enjoy, and that how can I, like, what unique ways can I share this in different lights? And then there's also the thought process of being extremely frustrated because things don't look good. Because you go through this, things just looking terrible for 80% of the portrait, and then it's slowly all of a sudden you're like, okay, I can see the light is getting a bit better. So there's a lot of having to push through the downs as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that brings up a really good point too. I mean, there's the old adage of, where artists will say a painting is never finished; it's just sort of turned loose or released.
I totally agree with it.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're working in a medium as such as this, where you're really in control of so much. There's so many different, bits of noodling that you could go to in this medium. How do you help yourself sort of turn that final portrait loose?
I feel like it's the exact opposite of what he said. I'm not in
Interesting.
control. I feel like the whole thing is complete chaos, and it's just absolutely like disaster. And what you're basically doing is untangling a knot. So basically, I get to the look depth stage and the render stage as quickly as I possibly can, and then to say, okay, what's wrong with this image? What's wrong with the render? The nose doesn't look right, so fix the nose. Re-render what doesn't look right. Okay, the eyes don't look right. Fix the eyes. What doesn't look right? The lighting. Fix the lighting. And so basically, it's just how many times can you go through this knot of untangling it until you get sick of it, and that's when you're gonna post it.
Well, it's good to hear that that all of us who feel that way, we're not alone. That you're kind of in the same boat. Yeah. So let's see here. The next question from the chat is: do you have any advice for getting such soulful eyes? I'm assuming that perhaps they're talking about your eyes personally as well as the eyes in your portraits. I'm not sure.
Soulful eyes. There's. Hold on, let me bring up the one. Actually, I got my website. Oops, wrong page. So this is the one I focus on the eyes, perhaps the most. This one's a couple years older now. But so there's the eyes can express basically so much. You can basically though, if you ever want to make somebody feel bad, you just don't look at them. That's how powerful eye contact is, and that's how powerful eyes can be. Like the smallest expression of an eye it's like the gateway to the mind, basically. But there are some techniques to help you utilize and focus on the eye a little bit more. So for Sean's portrait, the whole composition was basically, if you did a high threshold, it was kind of almost like there's more contrast towards his eye, pulling you into his eye a little bit. Even the color, everything's brown, yellow, pink, everything's kind of warm, but his eyes are blue. So it's like a contrast. So once again, it pulls you to look at his eye just a little bit more. And then this little highlights. This is something which is huge. Where playing with the highlights is actually, if you have like a highlight right in the middle of the eye, it actually makes you feel driven and determined. Whereas if you have no highlights, you actually feel like you're like kind of a ghost, or you're kind of dead. You feel like you're soulless, basically. So just like that little highlight, playing around with where it is in the body and like what it's doing, that can help bring eyes to life a little bit. My latest portrait I did of my mom, that was one of the things I focused most on, was just the highlights. So basically, I was trying to create something which is actually got enough detail which brings you in, but then you can see this piece is actually me working on her portrait in her eye, which is kind of a paradox, because if this was a photograph, you would have me holding the camera, not her looking at the portrait, and you can't have her looking at a finished portrait, basically. So it's kind of a little paradox, which helps say that the image is fake. It's not saying it's a photograph. It's saying, no, this image is fake. I'm not trying to hide it. So I use the highlight to actually tell that story. So I think just like focusing on what the eyes are doing and like where they're looking. Yeah, it's basically just where they're looking, how like squinty they are, how wide open they are, what color they are, how much shadow is on them. All that stuff kind of brings soul to it. But you just got to make sure you're doing it correctly.
So thank you for that answer. That's I'm listening and taking notes as well for myself. Let's see. Tayomika asks, do you model at the same focal length as your reference photos, or how do you make sure you don't distort the likeness with your reference?
I model the same focus length.
Okay.
So yeah. Oh, I can hear my.
Yeah, we're getting some more audio looping. Looks like Ray's on it though. He's going to fix it.
There we go.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. What was the question?
No problem. Thank you, Ray. Bear with us for a second, guys. We're just going to fix that audio loop. All right. Thanks for your patience, guys. We just need to take care of that so that we can all hear what Ian is saying to us. So, Ian, the question was about focal length and how do you keep from sort of distorting your sculpt. And I think you were talking about how it is 1-to-1 for you. You model at the same focal length as a photograph.
Yeah. So I'll like once you take photos, it comes with metadata, so you can just see what the focus length is, and then basically you just match the exact same focus length in Mudbox or Maya. So basically, like I'll take like 30 or 40 just around the head, and basically I'll recreate those cameras in Mudbox. I'll have like 30 of them, and then from each camera I'll have like kind of lined up with some photo references with the focus lengths all matched up, perfect 1-to-1. But yeah, the focus length. If you're not aware of what's going on, it's pretty difficult to do it. Like if you downloaded an image of a person offline and you have no idea what the focus length is, it's quite difficult to get it some accuracy. That's why it's like taking your own photo references is so much. It's not easier, but it's just like it eliminates one of the problems.
Speaking of which, just curious to know for one of these digital portraits from start to finish, like from wherever you begin in the process, whether that's the photography to the finished product, how long do these take you on average?
Some of them take like 3 months, and then some of them take 2 months. Yeah, probably between 2 and 3 months, I'd say.
Okay.
Like it depends on the complexity. Like my mom's portrait was a little bit quicker because she's just a head. Like there's no body. But like Erica's portraits. Oops. Let me go to the Erica's portrait quick. It was probably one of the most complicated ones because there's just so much happening in it. Like Erica's got a dog down here. She's got some jewelry. She's got a jacket. She's holding, got like her knees are up. She's holding her knees, her hands. Like it's like there's so much happening. Just like the backdrop here, I had to model all this stuff back here too. So this one took like 3.5 months just because there's so much stuff to model in it. Like the dog alone took me a while.
I think
So
I
yeah,
heard you.
sometimes
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think in another talk that I heard you give, there was something about the dog in this one. about whether or not the dog was going to be in the portrait?
Oh yeah. Basically, I was like, Erica is my girlfriend, so I was like, Erica, can I do a portrait of you? Because I would like love to do a portrait of you. She was like, if you don't do my dog, you get no portrait. So either do a portrait of my dog, or the answer is no. So basically, I had no choice. But then I didn't mind it because the dog is who she is. She's had it for 16 years. It's a part of who she is. She's grown up with it. Like it's a part of her personality, a part of who she is. And I was like, I think having a dog in there is quite valuable. And a lot of art history paintings, they have their dogs in paintings too,
Mm-hmm.
because people treat them like their family members. They're important to people. So I had no, actually, once I kind of realized how important it was, I had no problems adding it.
We've got a question from, let's see, Devin Gaser. He's wanting to know what your current specs are. I can only assume he's asking about hardware.
Yeah, I've got a desktop from Lenovo. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's a pretty good one. And then I'm using NVIDIA provided me some graphic cards, the RTX 6000s. So I've got two of those, and then also a Quadro P4000, which helps with like the display. But I use the RTX ones for rendering. Like the render of my mom, like a 3K image was like 5 minutes long
Mm-hmm.
to render. So that's pretty good.
Let's see. And Kapil Thapa asks, how do you figure out what makes the character look like them? How do you achieve their likeness?
I think the final result is really depends on the subject. And it's like if they feel like it looks like themselves. Like I just try my best to capture the essence of who they are. But obviously it's my envision of who they are. Like it's though like they say every portrait is a double portrait because it's also a portrait of the artist. So even though it's like I try to capture the essence and the likeness, it's also I'm putting so much of myself into it, so it's not 100% them. It's how I see them. So I think I don't know. For the most part, most of my subjects have been pretty happy with their likeness and how things have turned out. My mom didn't like her first portrait. She was a little upset about it, so that's why I did the new one. But yeah, I think for the most part, that's how it goes.
Yeah. And then let's see. Harsh Designs is asking, is it compulsory to make XGen on same models, or can we duplicate the areas for groom? I have a technical question there.
Uh, hold on a second. So what I do for my mom's hair, so it's like a model. Well, I got the high res model here. See if I hide that. I have like this head caps. So that was for her face. So that's basically what her hair was. So I can basically, actually it's not this one either. There's this one. So basically I make a hair cap. So basically that hair can just be wrapped onto the models. And if you wanted to, basically I could put this hair cap onto my model and I could have like, I could put my mom's hair on my head. Like you can start transferring like scalps from one model to another if you start making hair caps. And it's also a better way because if you want to render the high-res mesh, you don't have to reattach all the guides and stuff like that. So let's say if I start doing a render and I don't like this render and I got to fix the mouth, I don't have to like reattach the heads. I can just basically remove this, import a new one, re-render it because the hair caps basically just non-stop. As long as you've lined it up, made this surface live, and then you kind of snap or wrap to this mesh, it should be fine.
All right, thank you for that. Another question is sort of how does your work in doing 3D portraiture, how has that influenced your work overall as a digital artist?
How has doing 3D portraiture influenced me as an artist?
In doing other digital art forms.
I think it's helped. Doing digital portraiture has helped me become better at my job at work wise. Like the stuff I've done like at Oat Studio and stuff has helped me become a little bit better and like more efficient and doing stuff like this. Like these are some of the other creatures I did at Oats. So it's like even though it's not really a portrait, it's basically like it's like I learned the tools and learn how to use them. And basically, once you kind of learn how to do all that stuff, you can kind of transfer your skills pretty easily. I think it's mostly you learn how to get a good eye from doing portraits because portraits it's so because they have to be so precise and so accurate, and if they're off, you'll notice it. You end up developing a really good eye of what looks good and what doesn't look good. And then basically, once you've got that, you can kind of start applying it to other things. So some people, like when I tell them I can do some lighting at work, their first reaction is like, oh, no, you can't light. You're a portrait artist. And I'm like, well, if I'm a good portrait artist, I'm obviously going to be able to transfer my skill sets to other departments just because I'm able to understand what is what's visually pleasing and what's not. So yeah, I've kind of moved around a little bit, especially in Unity. We're doing some pretty cool stuff. Whereas like I'm really branching out. I'm not just doing characters. I'm kind of helping out with a little bit of the script, a little bit of lighting. Uh, you name it. Basically, it's like I'm getting into it, which is pretty exciting.
And do you have any examples that you can share of kind of how you've learned lessons along the way with with your digital portraiture? Like, what are some of the lessons that you learned with one project that helps you approach your following projects in a better way?
So I think every project is basically the next piece is already exists in the current piece, if that kind of makes sense. Like as I'm working on, let's say when I was working on Mike and Steph's portraits, like I feel like they had an argument at the time, so they didn't want to have a photo shoot together. So I took a pose of Stephanie at one point, and then the next day I took some photos of Mike, and then recreated his pose. But I feel like there's not really a connection between the two. Like even though I think the portrait works, I don't feel like there's a sister brother bond between the two of them. So I feel like from realizing this, I was like, okay, maybe I should just kind of focus on like just kind of how to bring like people back together and like create more of that emotion. And basically, as I'm doing this portrait, I realize what I did wrong, and I make sure I don't do it again. So
Mm-hmm.
each time I do a portrait, I try and learn from it and adapt from it.
Yeah. And then let's see, another question that's coming. We've got plenty of them. So if at any point there's certain things that you wanted to get to and what we're talking about tonight, please feel free to say so. But Yi 2021 is asking, do you have works from when you first started? How can a complete beginner begin with this journey? So I know you showed us some of your kind of other types of works that you did earlier. But I think what this viewer is asking is, kind of trying to relate to what it was like at the very beginning with
You want to see
digital
one of
portraiture.
my first models? My
If you'd
first
like to
model.
show it, yeah.
This is one of my first models I did at Seneca. This is when I was learning 3D. I did the head of Medusa.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was pretty. I don't know. Like you could tell, like the face, like the eyes and stuff. But you remember, there's no Mudbox back in the day. Like back in these days, and ZBrush was just coming out. So basically, this was all modeled in Maya.
Wow.
This is, yeah. This is my first digital human I ever did. I don't know what I was thinking on that one. I don't know. It's okay back in like I don't know, back 2005. We've adapted so
Yeah.
much better than that. That's my first 3D render I ever did. And then yeah, that's the second like environment render I've ever did. I thought this one kind of turned out okay, but this is 2005. Like things have changed quite a lot since then. I don't think a lot of people coming into the industry realize how much things have changed. Back in the day, it's like nobody knew what they were doing. Like everything was like a mad, like people trying this, trying that. And I think over the years, people have kind of fine tuned like a workflow, which kind of helps a little bit. And then a lot of people coming into the industry now they see this workflow. I'm like, yeah, that sounds good, and they kind of grow with it and change it a bit, but they don't see how many possibility things which went wrong to find that one path to get to that. So yeah, that was some of my early stuff. So if you can do this, I'm sure you could do what I do soon.
Well, and thank you for showing that. I know not everyone is willing to go back and show their really early stuff, but definitely that I think that's really beneficial for people who are getting started to see the range, like what you were at the beginning and what you're doing now. Maybe to unpack this question just a little bit more. So, remembering what it was like for you then, if you could sort of go back and either give yourself some guidance or encouragement or advice, what would you give to that younger artist?
I would just say create the stuff you love doing. Like if you love doing characters and you just don't want to do environments, just make characters. And it's like, yeah, you might not get a job, but you're gonna get good at modeling characters, and at some point, somebody's gonna notice it, and you probably get a job from doing it. And then all of a sudden, you've got a career in doing what you love. So I think you should just focus, even if it's the hard path, just do what you love, and somehow figure out a way how to make money from it. Basically, I think following your passions is the most important thing, because if you're gonna, let's say if you love characters, but you just end up doing environments or modeling stuff you don't want to, you're not going to have the drive to do it. You're not going to go home and feel enthusiastic by the end of the day and feel like you did something, like you accomplished something. If you've accomplished something you've loved doing, you're going to feel pretty good about yourself.
Absolutely. It's great advice. We've got a process-oriented question that's come in from I feel like I am going to do a very bad job at pronouncing this name, so I won't, because I don't want to insult the person asking. But their question is: after you project details by using a texture XYZ map, you'll continue to sculpt micro details, and how do you bring those handmade micro details back into Maya?
Basically, hold on a second. I can bring Scott back up. I guess I got so many images. Let's just go to the Mudbox, I guess. So yeah, I can because you saw the video before where I was doing the texturing XYZ stuff. So I projected onto here. Basically, I'll just export the whole mesh back into Maya and start rendering this. What is also pretty handy is when you create those texturing XYZ maps and create the normal maps. So once you've created a normal map in Mudbox, you can create a cavity map from it, which is pretty handy. You basically select your normal map. You take the red channel and the green channel, paste them into new layers, and then from each of those layers, you'll just stylize them. And then on one of the channels, you go 90 degrees, you press OK. And then the other one, you do the same thing, emboss. And then you just go like 0 degrees. So it's horizontal and vertical. You've got both the axes. And then once you've basically got that down, you just put them on overlay. And then basically you've got this like really nice cavity map, which you just need to bump up a little bit. And also, once you've got this, you can put this onto your spec map, and you can also actually put it back into Mudbox to create even more of a pour pass, to make it a little bit more like depth. So basically, I usually find this is one of the things which really helps me really create the realism, because you can use this for so many different things. And then, once I've done that, I've created the maps from it. I just export the high-res head and then render the high-res head.
Now we've got a question about posing that's come in. Let's see here. They're wanting to know, if are you sculpting with the base mesh posed from the beginning, or are you doing some sculpting then? Like, how does the point that you pose your mesh, where does that come into the process?
I pose my mesh like the very first thing I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got that. To it. So yeah, basically this is my process. I'll just pose this guy. So basically, once I've posed my character, or any character, any portrait I've done, they all look like this person. They're all this person. I take this person into Mudbox, and then that's when I start cleaning it up. So I never model symmetrically. I always model in pose. So some people say like, oh, well, can you animate these and rig them? It's like technically you could, but ideally it would be a T-pose would be ideal. Mm-hmm. But I always model in pose to begin with.
And what's the, I mean, I can suppose what some of the reasons would be, but for you, what is the reasoning behind wanting to do it in that order?
Well, it's like for production, there's no way I'd ever do it like this. But I'm at home. I just find it's easier. Instead of modeling things twice, you just model it once. So instead of having to model T-pose, then rig it, and then you've got all those weird penetrations, and you got like things you got to fix. If you just right away put it in the pose, right away, the things you focus on are like the weight of the arms, like the fabrics, how they fold, and like how the muscles like pushes off the next muscle and stuff. You start focusing on things which actually matter. Once you go from a T pose and then pose it, you kind of like, you don't really notice those things as much. You kind of just like, okay, it's posed, it's good enough. You don't think about the gravity and all this other variables which actually change. Like, yeah, I think there was a couple portraits I did where it's like, I started modeling them in T-pose and then I posed them a little bit and it looked a little bit off. And then I kind of realized it's like a lot of the neck, you got a lot of fat in your neck, and just moving the fat to make it feel a lot more gravity made them feel a lot more realistic. I think from that point I started realizing that modeling in pose is actually a little bit easier. It's more difficult because you can't have the symmetry brush. So you got to model every ear twice.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think it's better. It makes it more believable.
Oh, we've got somebody, let's see, Falco M is wanting to know, what is the process for painting that you're using? Are you using only Photoshop or are you using any other softwares, for example, Mari or Substance Painter?
No, just Mudbox and Photoshop.
Okay.
Yeah, basically. It's like a mix. So I use the photos to help me. So I project a little bit of the photos, what I've got. So it's a mix of like projection and hand paints. So it's like a 50-50. And then, yeah, I just clean it up in Photoshop, basically.
And then, let's see, Curious Little Critter, great name. Do you make the clothing in Maya or in Mudbox?
I make the base in Maya. So basically, I just got nice clean topology. Yeah, it's too bad I don't actually have it. Yeah, I create like a really like super low res geometry in Maya. So let's say if I was modeling Scots, like this would be almost like it's almost like a rectangle with like the topology all lined up. So I can UV it. So once it's UV'd, then I can take it into Mudbox, clean it up, start sculpting it. I might export back to Maya a little bit higher res version and then relax the UVs again, put it back to Mudbox, and then redefine some of the small details and stuff like that, and then that goes back to Maya again to render. So it's a little bit back and forth, but yeah, I always start off lower res in Maya.
Yeah. And then let's see, kind of a follow-up question from the same person. Do you use a previous rig again and again?
Yeah, so that guy you saw before basically is the same for every portrait. I've changed it a little bit since my self portraits. So with Heidi, myself, or my mom, since there's like a new stage I'm trying to push, I've altered it just a little bit, but it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, and then let's see. Amso is wanting to know, is there any reason why you use V-Ray over other renderers?
I'm just like comfortable with the V-Ray. It's one of those tools where I just know how to use it. I just know how to get like the results I like. Yeah, I don't know. I find it easy. Like I can just, some people think it's quite complicated, but basically I just open it up out of the box settings. I can just press render right away, and it gives me good results. And I've just become so efficient with it. I can like, if I see something not quite right, I know how to fix it now.
Yeah. And then let's see. Enyo244 is wanting to know, what is the secret cloth shader inside V-Ray?
The cloth shader?
Yeah.
I don't even know. I've never heard of the cloth shader.
Okay. And then another viewer who's sort of making an observation and then asking a question about it. They're saying, looking at all of your portraits, there seems to be a conscious decision of not having the subjects do really extreme expressions with their faces. Is there a conscious decision behind that?
For a while, it was big. I just wanted to get something more like a Renaissance painting, whereas
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't about. It was almost uh, like this one of my mom I did. I wanted her to feel like she has been sitting like a queen in a way. Hold on a second. There we go. I wanted her to feel like she's like I actually was painting her, so she's got that feeling that she's been there for a while, and it kind of gives her that the status that it feels like a painting if she's got a pose like that. So for a while, I was trying to get people to not be too expressive, but I think in my newer work, I'm going to try and explore a little bit more expression.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everything from my self-portraits to my self-portrait again, I think I consider that like series one. And then my self-portrait, Heidi, my mom, is like part of my next series where I'm going to try and branch out and do more different things. So I think an expression is something I definitely want to get into,
Mm-hmm.
like a more extreme.
And then Pietro Berto is asking, do you ever plan to implement real-time characters into your personal work?
Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, I'm doing real-time stuff at Unity now, so I'm just kind of discovering the potentials of it and the power of it. But yeah, I think so. I would like to get into that. I want to really get good at it and not just show something average before I start releasing anything. But yeah, I definitely going to get into that.
And then kind of a question that we do like to ask a lot of our guests is, what advice do you have for artists out there that are wanting to get into 3D portraiture? They're seeing the work that you're doing, they're inspired, and they want to do a similar kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's just basically also if you just do a self-portrait. Like if you don't know what to do, just use a self-portrait. I mean, you've got a mirror. Most people have mirrors, so you can just either use a mirror. If you've got a phone, you can start taking photos of yourself. You just gather references of yourself, and then just start. Like everybody thinks that there's this defining path, or this is what you're supposed to do, and you're not supposed to do this, and this is the correct method. There is no method. Nobody knows exactly how to do it. I mean, it's like that's one of the beauties of digital, like the 3D digital world, because it's so new that we're all still discovering how to do things. So don't feel like you can't do something just because you don't know how it's supposed to be done. Just like fake it, basically, like fake it until you make it almost.
Yeah, thank you for that. I believe we've had another question come in from the chat that you may have answered earlier. Maybe they've tuned in a little bit later, but I believe you said earlier that you sculpt all of the clothes yourself, or are you using any sims in regards to achieving the clothes?
No, I usually just sculpt all of them. Yeah, I don't think there was any sim. Oh, the only time I used a sim was on my mom's portrait for her scarf. So that was the only time I ever used a sim. But every time I just sculpt it, just because I like the control.
Yeah. And I recall you saying earlier too, like there's certain art direction and compositional decisions that you're able to make if you want a specific fold in a specific place.
Yeah,
Doing it that way.
like
Yeah.
this one, like just having my jacket give that diagonal and all these lines, like it created this nice composition of these diagonals. Whereas I feel like if I did it in Marvelous Designer, I would have to really play around trying to get that to work well.
Mm-hmm. We've had a question come in that you talked. I think you talked a little bit about the differences between these two earlier, but it may be worth unpacking a little bit more. Let's see. Worldwide Internet says you've turned 3D portraiture into an important new art. Could you explain how this new art form is different than photorealism?
Yeah. So like this new art form is like there's more potential for it for like the technology of like how things can be done. So obviously like having things 3D and like be able to like the digital humans are being used in movies and stuff like that. There's more potential for stuff like that. So I think yeah, I think the world's moving more towards like online stuff. So having a digital human to be a part of that is one of the is basically the future of how things are going to be done. I would also like to discover how to make them these humans feel what we feel like from paintings. So like the emotions we get from paintings and drawings and even photography, I just want to be able to still express that in these digital humans, which is still like we're still getting there. I think there's still a lot of room to grow. But I think once we get there, it's going to open up even more doors. It's basically like an avenue which is we've not discovered what its potential of yet. So I think by going down this path, we can open up more doors which we've not even thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. And then coming back to the chat here, and there's plenty of questions which is coming in great. I mean, the chat's been awesome tonight with some of the feedback and questions that have come in. Stout Fella is asking, do you take data, for example, RGB and luminosity? Do you take data from your reference pictures to get the realistic render result, or leave the magic to V-Ray?
I try and get like I don't get like any of the data, but I do try and get the values of like how bright lights can be. So I'll play a little bit with the thresholds basically, or just make something like really black and white and just seeing where the highlights are basically, and then I'll see if like that works in for composition wise, and then I kind of transform that into my 3D renders. But basically, my 3D renders, I get to a point where I copy some photographs, like multiple photographs, and then I start straying away from them to get this more artistic approach. Whereas like I'll do different poses, different compositions. So it's never one to one because I really want to. Sometimes the photos don't work the way I'm trying to tell the story. So I'm trying to, like for example, creating those diagonals in my shirts, creating stuff like that, just kind of changing things. I think that just kind of helps a little bit.
And something you were talking about earlier that I'm wondering if you can unpack a little bit more is, a lot of times we hear the term hyperrealism, and some people can think that just means the same thing as photorealism, like facsimile, as it were.
Yeah.
But talk to us a little bit more about the concept of hyperrealism and how it is different from just like a copy in terms of just taking a photograph.
Yeah, like so basically you can just get your phone and take a photo of somebody who's standing up like just doing nothing or something, and it says no story. It's just a one-to-one like accurate representation of them. It does like it's almost impossible not to have some story, but for the most part, if you're just going to take some random photograph and just copy it, that's considered photorealism because it's matching a photograph. But if you're gonna, even if you can take a photograph and this photograph explains the story, like Steve McCurry's like National Geographic cover. That he took a portrait of somebody, and that expressed so much story and emotion that even though the photograph wasn't about photography, it was about hyperrealism, even though it's a photograph, because it was showing the essence of the subject. It was showing the story, and you can actually feel who this person was, and it creates a lot of emotion. And I think that's what I'm trying to focus more on. So even photography can be hyperrealism as well, but if it's just photograph, you could take a photograph of the ground, and then like you wouldn't really frame it and put it above your fireplace. It's like that's kind of like the difference between them.
Absolutely. And again, it's, you're bringing the fine art, and there's many ways it's being done, but you're definitely bringing the sense of, yes, absolutely, digital can be and is fine art when it comes to the expressiveness. So you mentioned earlier when you were talking about lighting, that it sounded like there was more that you wanted to unpack in terms of like composition when it comes to lighting.
Yeah, there's a huge topic of lighting we can discuss if you want. Do we have time?
We do. I think we're slated until about 9:30, so that gives us about 15, 16 more minutes.
Okay, we can talk a little bit about lighting. Hold on a second. Let me. Okay, so this is a portrait I did of Andre. So basically, the types of lighting you can use. So this is basically just the key lights shining onto Andre. And then basically you added a little rim lights if you wanted to. I'm just showing you I'm just going to show you different lights for now, and then I'm going to explain how they affect the portraits in a minute. Then you got a little bit of bounce lights. So it's 3-point lights. So your key light, bounce light, rim lights. So basically, you can create every single portrait you ever need from those 3 lights, or a variation of those 3 lights. You can even use the key lights for flat lighting. So if you remove all the lights and just have one, this is just one light now. So this is flat lighting. So basically it's all straight on. And this type of lighting was used like the early century arts, where it's like everything was flat. This is the type of lighting you would have for like a sitcom or like a news broadcast. It's something which lacks personality. It's more like a passport photo. It's like, that's the person. And then you can add, like for a sitcom, add the story behind it. There's butterfly lighting. I'm pretty sure butterfly lighting, which is basically a little bit from top down. It just creates this little shadow on the nose. This is more of a feminist type of lighting. This is Paramount uses this quite a bit to showcase women. It kind of like highlights the cheekbones, making them seem more beautiful, I guess. But it's typically used for women. And if that light goes too far behind the head, it creates like this raccoon eyes, which is not always a good thing. But if you're doing a portrait of a serial killer, then it's really good. And you got the Frankenstein lighting, just move the same light down below. We're not used to seeing people like this, so it feels unnatural. So like this is good for horror movies because things aren't supposed to feel the way they're supposed to. This is loop lighting. So basically the shadow on the nose is not quite touching with this shadow on the opposite side of the cheek. And then if this light comes to the touch is that point, so you create this little triangle. This is called Rembrandt lighting. So this is basically my favorite lighting. So Rembrandt uses this a lot. And what Rembrandt lighting is really good at doing is it gives you a certain eye to look at. So in portraits, you should never really have both eyes equal. There should always be one eye stronger than the other eye. So you're basically controlling where the viewer is going to look and what eye they're going to look at. And so Rembrandt lighting, that's what it does. It tells you what eye to look at. If that light goes a little bit further to the side, you have split lighting, which is absolutely amazing for doing dramatic portraits. So this is a painting by Caravaggio, where David just killed the head of Goliath, chops his head off. It's very dramatic because he uses split lighting on both the heads. You feel it's a little bit more intense. They use this type of lighting for like movies like John Wick and stuff. Dark side lighting, where you kind of just render on the dark side and the light is on the opposite side coming closer. This is makes it a little bit more dramatic. So this person is just reading a newspaper, but it feels like one of the most intriguing, interesting people ever reading a newspaper. Like you want to actually go and discuss with him what he's reading. He's just reading a newspaper, but the lighting creates interest. Broad light is basically the lights on the rendering on the bright side. This is a good way to make images feel 3D. So if you're rendering on the broad side, you get a depth. Like it feels like there's a subject which goes, it's like comes at you a little bit. There's a little bit. You've got to focus on the background and what the background is doing too. So what I really like sometimes is when the shadows from the body blend into the background, and so you can't quite see the difference between where a shoulder is. But there's no confusion because your mind kind of makes up that silhouette for you, and I think that's a little bit one of those things where, like the mystery, kind of helps create the story and the artwork. I really love doing that aspect of things. So there's checkerboard lighting too. So the lighting on the background is opposite from the face. So it goes dark, light. This is really good if your character's very noisy and the background's pretty noisy and things are getting lost and you don't know what's happening. If you create a checkerboard lighting, it makes the subject stand out. So there's no confusion of what's background and what's the foreground. Everything is very easy, simple to read. So like her hat is basically like there's no confusion. You know exactly what's happening with these portraits. So yeah, so for Andre's portrait, I used a little bit of the loop lighting. I thought that best represented who he was. The background is kind of blurred into him a little bit, which I thought was kind of cool. You can also think about the distance of where the light is. So the distance really affects how the portrait is done. Like a close-up light feels very intimate. The further away the light is, it kind of flattens everything out, but it makes it a little bit harder shadows. So depending on what you want, it's kind of really is dramatically different with each other. We talk about the inverse squared law. I won't talk too much about this one. Basically, the light falls off. It's the fall off of light. It's basically is the inverse squared law. So at 1 unit, if you square 1 unit, this light is 100%. And you go 1 unit back. So at second, like let's say 2 feet. Let's say these are 2 feet. So 2 feet squared, it's 1/4. So the light is at 25%. At 3 feet, you square it. That's 1/9. So the light is at 11%, and then you just keep on squaring it. And so that by the time you're at 7 feet, the light is only at 2% light. So you've lost a lot of light by the time you've got to here. And then once you've gone 10 feet, you've got almost no light. So it's 1% light. And the way how that really affects the portraits basically is if you have the light close up, the fall off is going to be huge from the cheek to the elbow. Like the elbow's almost got no light on it. So the shadows are super soft. Everything's kind of like it feels like it's a very way like this is like Rembrandt. Rembrandt would do something like this where it feels a very good fall off, feels warm, comforting. And the further away you go, like the lighting basically becomes like a little bit flatter. The shadows become a little bit harder. So notice like the shadow on his arm right here, it becomes a little bit harder and harder the further the way he goes from the light. So now this light, the shadow is almost a solid line, and it's like there's no fall off. Basically, his head's just as bright as his arm, but the shadows are pretty hard. So it's like if you wanted to make something feel less intimate, you can do something like this. And doing something like this is also a good way to make it feel more dynamic, because you get hard lines, hard shadows, which could create tension and dramaticness. I won't talk about that. So yeah, even like changing the size of the lights doesn't actually change the fall off either. Like some people think, well, if you change the size of the light, it'll make the fall off difference. The fall off is the same for all lights. It's like light is based on one law. Doesn't matter if you change the size. The intensity, if you scale up the light, the intensity will go up, yes, but if the actual light doesn't fall off any different. So you can scale the light. So if you forget about the distance, scaling the light, basically it creates, you get a lot softer shadows. So if you don't like your shadows being hard, but you want the light farther away, let's say you want the whole subject lit up, so you want the light farther away, but you don't want those hard shadows, you can start scaling the light up and then reducing the intensity, which creates that softness, but overall there's less fall off because it's kind of going all over the body. What's interesting about fall off, basically the light is super close up. You got a nice glow. Light goes further back, light goes further back again. If you notice the background, the further away the light is, the brighter the background becomes. So the light goes further away from the background and the background gets brighter. The intensity has to go up, but the fall off is not the same. The fall off is a lot less. So let's say he's between 3 feet and 4 feet. So between 3 feet and 4 feet, the fall off was, so you're losing 5%, let's say, or 4%. You're losing 4% light between there and there. But between here and here, so he's almost at like the 1 foot mark, and this is almost at the 2 foot mark. So it's like there's a lot more fall off. So he's between here and the background's here, so you're losing 25% light. So you're losing 25% there and a lot more there. So that's kind of how fall off works. So it's also interesting to see like how that relates when you do portraiture. Another thing you can do is to control where the light goes. It starts like creating like cones and like card. Like I usually you create planes, and I put planes in the way to block off shadows. Sometimes it's like I like the light being far away. I like the shadows being hard, but I don't want you to focusing on the brights of the arm. So I'll put something in the way of the arm so you can't actually see the light bouncing on the arm. So this one's pretty cool. You just put a cardboard piece there, like a piece of paper. Sometimes I do this with when I take portraits of people. I'll just put a piece of paper there, and then it creates this little bounce light that's on the side. So you don't actually have to put a light. You can just put a white plane there. So now I've got some examples of different types of lighting. So basically, this is like you obviously can say I put two planes in the way. The light has got a little bit of fall off. It's not too much fall off, so it's probably a middle distance away. That gives a pretty different feeling. This one, you can tell the light's kind of further away. The background's brighter, so there's not much fall off. The shadows are pretty hard. So you got the almost Rembrandt lighting. It's almost like a middle distance away. It's not too close, but it's not too far. There's a little bit of fall off from the face to the background. But it's cool that the background is blending in with this t-shirt, so you got that mystery of where things are. You got flat lighting. So basically the light's kind of a little smaller, but it's very intense, but it's pretty small. Like the shadows are pretty hard. This is more like if you're doing a passport, basically. Like a passport photo. Split lighting. So the light's obviously a little bit closer again, so there's a lot more fall off. This creates a little bit more dramaticness. Yeah, kind of like the Caravaggio you saw before. This one, you can tell that the light's large. So it's probably like a middle distance away, but the light's probably like a foot by a foot. So this is the type, like if you had a softbox, this is the type of lighting you would have. This kind of makes it feel like, he kind of looks more depressed. Like he doesn't look like he's driven or determined. He's kind of more just like subdued, lazy. And that's kind of just from changing the lighting. Yeah, this is like a Rembrandt lighting again, but notice that there's almost no shadows. Like there's no shadow coming from his nose, so the light is pretty large, but it's pretty close up. So it's probably a large light, about like this size, close up. It's pretty good for like intimacy and not feeling aggressive, but I don't think I'll ever do anything with this because I always like a little bit of shadow. And then just changing the shape of the light. You can also change the shapes of the light. So this is like a light stick in a way. So it's pretty close. There's a lot of fall off between the center of the light and the fall off. So you can tell it's like you can tell from the reflection of his eyes, it's like maybe a foot away from his face. And that creates a completely different look just from, it looks pretty like he's on like Time cover type of thing. It's more like, I don't know, he's like engaging you, kind of want to talk to him. He's like a new discovery or something. I don't know. But each type of lighting has got a different story it tells, and it's all the same subject and all the same pose. It's just changing the lighting changes everything about the portrait. So I think it's something to focus on when people are doing the work. Just the size of the lights, the placement of the light, the intensity of the light, and even the shape of the light. So I think focusing those 4 things is really going to help bring portraits to life.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. If we've got a few more minutes to kind of wrap up, I think we've got just about 3 more questions that have come in. See what we can what we can take on before we wrap today. Let's see here. One of our viewers is, of course, saying you're definitely one of the most talented 3D artists out there, with great traditional and philosophical understanding on art. How do you tackle the frustration when working on big projects where maybe that art aspect is lacking?
Yeah, it's frustrating. I find working in productions, you have less of the art aspect of things. So sometimes if you're working on a movie, you might not agree with the art director, or you might not agree with the people above you, but you kind of got to do it anyway because it's like that's your job. That's what you're getting paid to do. But to deal, like at the end of the day, like for the most part, I've felt pretty happy with the jobs I've worked on. But sometimes I feel a lack of satisfaction, so I'll go home and always do my personal work. I find personal work is the best way to feel artistic and creative. Even if you're just doing a sketch or like a 5-minute drawing, it doesn't need to be anything. It could just be for yourself. But do something for yourself, like as often as you can, when you can, and you feel honestly, it'll make you feel better. Like I think I work every waking minute, and it's like if I have spare time, I work on my portraits because it just makes me feel good. For the most part, when they look good, when they look terrible.
Yeah. Creative sustainability is so important.
Yeah.
And you can't just count on the job for that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's see. Just deciphering the question here. Hudson Neely is asking, would you say that creating an underlying facial muscular anatomy is going to, I think he's asking if it's going too far in the pursuit of hyperrealism. Is there any benefit from pursuing this, such as rigging and so forth?
It helps, I think. I think people, like, if it's for production, I think it helps riggers understand how things are moving. And it's like if you have an underlying muscle system, I think for the face, I'm not sure if it'll work, but if like the muscle, like arms and stuff, having an underlying muscle system and doing a muscle simulation on it, it'll really help. But I think for doing that stuff for personal work, I don't think you need to do it, but you do need to understand it. You do need to understand what muscles are there. You do need to understand where like your eyeball sockets are, like where your temporal line is. You need to understand the anatomy. You can't just model a head and have no anatomy underneath. Like basically, all my portraits, I actually sometimes will place a skull inside of it just to make sure the head looks about right, like the right shape, the right size, and just to get the points. Like with Scott Eaton's portrait, I actually completely recreated his skull entirely because I did his face, and then I did a reverse forensics to figure out the shape of the skull. But the skull, I knew it was based on almost real proportions. I did it just to change it a little bit, and I think that really helps me not only get Scott's likeness better, but it actually also got my anatomy skills a little bit better as well. That's actually something which I did in Scott's portrait, which can't be done in real life. He's actually holding his own skull.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Like down to like the millimeter probably. Like from the photo references, his head matches up pretty close, and then just did the reverse forensics to figure out the exact skull shape.
That's really cool. Let's see, and I think our final question of the night, a little bit of a technical one. So the viewer is asking also the settings for RTX rendering. How do you set RTX for your recent portraits? And this is a question that's been coming up.
What did I do? Okay, so you can see my screen, right? Oh, you can see. Yeah, you can see that window.
Yeah, we're getting your screen.
So yeah, all I do is I just go to RTX, and then this little view, I can choose my render cards. So I've got this one which is used for the display, so I can sometimes put that on too. But sometimes if I want to play around with the internet while things are rendering, I leave it off. But basically, I just put those on, and then you can just go into the V-Ray IPR and render it, or just render it through the frame buffer. That's all I do. That's how I use them. It's pretty straightforward, I think, unless I'm missing something, as everyone else knows I don't.
That's awesome. So we're just about at time, and I'm just if there's any sort of closing remarks or thoughts that you still wanted to share, Ian, so make sure you have the opportunity to do that.
I think we covered quite a lot
Yeah,
today. I
we
think it
covered a
was,
lot of ground tonight.
yeah,
Absolutely.
pretty fun actually. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, this has been an absolute delight having you on the stream. And, I think for me anyway, one of the big takeaways is the way that you have really built that bridge back to art history, back to studying the masters. Just studying current art isn't always going to get you there. And you've unpacked that masterfully for us today, and really enjoying your work, enjoying kind of seeing the peek behind the curtain, seeing the behind the scenes. But thank you so much, Ian. It's been a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Absolutely. So, guys, we have more Twitch content coming up this week as well. So, on tomorrow morning, Wednesday, from 9 in the morning to 12 noon, our Chief Creative Officer, Josh Herman at Gnomon, is going to be having an art jam. And these have been really awesome times where essentially you get to hang out with a pro industry artist who's worked on some amazing projects and kind of just see his process. And he's answering questions both about his process and what he's doing, as well as questions about Gnomon during the stream. So that's a great opportunity to kind of have an accountability partner as you're working on your art. And then coming up on Friday at 11 a.m., we are going to be having a special info session stream from Gnomon with a special guest, Casey McDermott. And Casey is an animator who's worked on some amazing projects, including some fantastic stuff with Blizzard. And he's going to be sharing about his journey and some of what he does, what his process is. And we're going to be following that up, not only with his advice for artists, but also some information about Gnomon's academic offerings and how Gnomon is training artists for careers in digital production. So, guys, thank you for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure, and want to give thanks once again to Ian for giving his time tonight and for just getting this sort of real, like, very close up session with his thought process and everything he's done. So, thank you, Ian, for your generosity tonight. So, yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys tomorrow morning for the Art Jam and for additional content coming out on our Twitch channel. Thanks, guys, and good night.